Good afternoon, everybody. I can see that you're all joining. Thank you so much for your interest in today's virtual learning cafe. We've had a phenomenal, almost 300 people sign up for this. I don't think there'll be that many who join us on the day, but I can see already there's a lot of people in the room. Um, my name is Gail Gibbons. I'm Head of Change at the Youth Endowment Fund, and I'm also joined by my colleague Violetta, who is sorting out some of the technical side. We'll make a start straight away because, as you know, we have a strict hour and a half today. We will be finishing on time because I know that you'll all be very busy people. So I'll just very briefly run through what will happen. So to start with, we have Pippa Bohr and Alice Bull from the Department for Education. Pippa is a DFE policy lead for the APST programme. So for those who don't know, that's the Alternative Provision Specialist Task Force, what we're talking about today. And Alice is a senior research officer in the DFE Violence Research and Analysis team. And they'll be talking through the programme as a whole and also what we're hoping to learn from the programme and what we're hoping to achieve. So the outcomes that we're hoping to achieve. Whilst they're speaking, do feel free to drop any questions or comments that you have into the chat and we'll pick them up at the end of Alice and Pippa's presentation. But I will be leaving some space for people to put their hands up at that point and ask any questions that you might have. Don't worry if you think about questions for Pippa and Alice later on because there'll be chance at the end as well. I'm then going to transfer you over to Richard Bottomley. So Richard is a head teacher from the Bradford AP Academy, and he is going to be presenting, along with some of his colleagues in the school, their experience of being part of the APST programme. We'll then move straight on to Dirk Pittard, from St Wilfrid's Academy in Doncaster, which is an alternative provision school. And Dirk and his colleagues will also be presenting about their experience of being involved in the programme. It'll be really exciting to hear what they have to say. And then after Richard and Dirk have spoken, there'll be more time for questions for both them and anything you've got that's come to mind that you might want to ask Pippa or Alice. So, in terms of just a little bit of housekeeping, we are recording the session, and everybody who attends will receive a link to that recording and also a link to any slides that you used today. So feel free to share those with colleagues who've not been able to attend and obviously keep for your own record as well. Please can I ask everybody to mute? I think everybody is at the moment, but as you probably know if you use Teams, we do get an echo, quite a nasty echo if anyone's not muted. So if you remain mute, unless obviously that you're speaking. So I'm going to first hand over to Pippa and Alice for their first presentation.
Brilliant, thanks Gail. Can I just check that those slides are coming up for everybody?
Yeah. Yes, they're there.
Brilliant, thanks. So hi everybody, nice to see you all. I'm Pippa, I'm one of the policy leads for the APST pilot within the Department for Education. And as Gail mentioned, Alice Bull, who's co-presenting with me, is the lead analyst at DFE for the programme. So Alice and I are going to kick off with an overview of the APST programme, why we wanted to test this approach, what it is, how it fits with alternative provision reform, as well as how it's being evaluated. And then, as Gail mentioned, it's over to Dirk and Richard, who are going to really bring to life what it means for children, schools and their partners through their experiences in the pilot. So why APST? So essentially, APST involves bringing teams of the right specialists, both clinical health specialists and youth and family-based professionals on site within AP schools, working together so that support for children is joined up. But why do this? Well, children attending AP can have some of the highest needs and poorest outcomes in the education system. As you can see on the slide, 83% had been identified with a special educational need, 26% had an education, health and care plan, 58% were known to be eligible for free school meals, 69% had been a child in need in the past 6 years, and 8% had been looked after. 59% entered sustained post-16 education, training or employment, and 29% of children who were cautioned or sentenced for an offence had ever attended AP, and 14% of children who were cautioned or sentenced for a serious violence offence had ever attended AP. So these needs, or more the underlying factors, often manifest as challenging or disruptive behaviour, which can have a severe impact on their education and that of other pupils, resulting in them requiring AP rather than mainstream education. And before reaching AP, often children have experienced fragmented or hard to access support. For example, they might have been referred to mental health services, but not attended appointments due to factors like stigma or access challenges like travelling across postcodes. And so by the time they reach AP, their needs may have escalated. And through that experience, they might have developed mistrust for professional support. And their journey itself into AP has also likely involved the breakdown of and exclusion from relationships. And so repairing children's trust through relationship-based support is an essential part of the APST approach. And this, along with the available evidence on multidisciplinary school-based support, informed the development of the APST model. And in November 2021, the Department for Education, in collaboration with other government departments and supported by the Youth Endowment Fund, launched a pilot in 22 schools in England, which placed multidisciplinary teams of specialists in AP schools. The 22 schools were selected based on areas with the highest volume of serious violence incidents and then the largest AP schools within those areas. So what is APST? So in each of the 22 schools, multidisciplinary teams have been formed, which include at least four of the different specialists in the diagram on the slide. And specialists are a mix of staff seconded from services like child and adolescent mental health services, community health, youth justice, often splitting their time between the alternative provision and their home service, as well as specialists who are directly recruited or appointed by the school. And the core components of the model are that task forces are located in AP schools, where, as I've just mentioned, the needs are particularly acute. Teams are co-located and they're led by a skilled task force manager, which we've seen to be essential for effective delivery. And specialists are able to share their knowledge and come together to coordinate support rooted in a holistic understanding of children's lives. And teams are on site within the school, enabling specialists to better understand children's needs, build those trusted relationships, and they get to know children, they see them around school, they know when they're struggling and can be on hand to provide support. But they can also work with children outside of school hours, mornings, evenings, holidays, and at home or in the community, depending on what's needed. And specialists can therefore be responsive to children's needs. They can do much of their assessment and support work directly within the school and can access other specialists' input really easily. And specialists can be that bridge and bridge the gap between their home service and the AP. And they work together within the team, with teachers and staff across the school, as well as transferring that knowledge back to home services. To set the APST model in the broader policy context, earlier this year, DfE published the Special Educational Needs and Disabilities and AP Improvement Plan, which sets out the vision for AP to be used as effectively as possible as an intervention and not simply a destination. And this involves a three-tier approach to AP, shown on the slide, where children are supported early before need escalates in Tier 1. And in Tier 2 are given targeted support through short-term placements and given the right support to sustain a return into mainstream. And then in Tier 3, mainly for older children in Key Stage 4, are supported in AP to then have successful post-16 transitions into education and employment. And we see APST as an important avenue for local partnerships to deliver the three-tier model effectively. So Alice, in a moment, is going to talk about the independent evaluation of APST. But firstly, this slide reflects on the DfE collected data and case studies, showing early positive indications for pupils and the benefits of greater strategic join-up across AP services and mainstream schools. I'm not going to go through everything on the slide, but I think one of the key things that stands out is that we've seen very low numbers of children refusing task force support. So in our last term's metrics, that was only 7 out of over 1,500 pupils, which I think is suggestive that teams are able to engage pupils, who again are some of the hardest to reach children, and that children see the value in engaging. I also think there's a really great quote from one of the CAMS practitioners here in the orange box that really captures the essence of APST. She says, as services, we just need to work a little differently and more creatively to ensure that we provide support in a way that works for children. And finally, I'm just going to end my section before I hand over to Alice with a case study from one of the children who's been supported by an APST. It's the case study of Lewis. Lewis came to us following multiple permanent exclusions. At our initial meeting, conversations with Mum revealed the extent of Lewis's difficult home life. Recent events with his dad had meant to move out of the area to inadequate accommodation, where he and his siblings currently sleep on the floor. Mum said she was worried about who Lewis was mixing with socially. He had disclosed to us that he had recently had both his hands broken by people in the community after he threw away a package he had been asked to take care of. Lewis had also been involved in the extortion of money from younger students, with a peer that had recently been stabbed. Lewis shared that he was devastated about being permanently excluded from school. He was worried about how he was going to get back on track and into a post-16 placement that would enable him to study medicine. Our social worker worked with Lewis and Mum, offering a support package through the APST programme and enabling Lewis to still enter his exams. We offered one-to-one mentoring in addition to his core lessons, assessment from our speech and language therapist, time with our educational psychologist to explore how Lewis had become involved with the incidents resulting in his exclusion, as well as offering appointments with our post-16 support to explore his future options. APST enabled a bespoke plan for a student who had fallen off track. The task force worked to discover his aspirations and supported Lewis to engage with all learning and embrace education. The team supported Lewis in writing an apology to the head of his previous school, following which he was invited to a meeting and given another chance at mainstream school. Lewis was delighted to share that he was going back, and he was incredibly thankful for all the support, nurture, love, kindness and guidance he had received whilst he was with us. The task force worked with Lewis and Mum to help with the transition. Lewis fully embraced and engaged with all the specialists. He shared that despite his mistakes, he felt valued and supported because the task force showed him why his aspirations were so important. He had identified himself that he would benefit from learning more directly from youth justice about how serious and detrimental consequences to behaviours could be and the impact of this. Lewis has now returned to mainstream school and is settling in well. Mum shared how grateful she is that Lewis had been given the opportunity to access the incredible support and intervention from such an excellent team of specialists. Mum said that without the APST pilot, her son would not have been able to access the help he really needed. As a school, we have developed a positive partnership with Lewis's mainstream school. We have learned how, with the correct specialist support available at the right time, we can really turn a situation around for a child quickly. And that's the end of my section, so I'll hand over to Alice, who's going to talk through the aims of the APST evaluation.
Well, thank you, Pippa. So in terms of evaluating it, we have got a consortium, which is made up of Rand Europe, FFT Data Lab and the University of Westminster, who are conducting this independent evaluation. And this evaluation has been commissioned and is being funded by the Youth Endowment Fund. So initially, the APST programme was planned to run from September 21 to August 23. And when this was the plan, the evaluation was only going to cover these 2 academic years. However, the implementation of the programme was slightly delayed, and this partly led to the decision earlier this year to extend the programme to conclude in March 25. And YEF have commissioned and they are funding an evaluation of part of this delivery extension period. So this is the 3rd academic year of delivery from September 23 to August next year. The evaluation has 3 parts to it. So we've got a process evaluation, and this is to understand the implementation of the programme for the schools, the staff, the DfE, and also our local areas. We've also got an impact evaluation, and this is making use of a quasi-experimental design with a difference in differences approach to estimate the impact of attending school that is operating in APST on pupil outcomes compared to attending a school which does not operate in APST. And we've also got an economic evaluation to understand the cost of delivering APST for government. You can see in the right-hand side, we've got the different methods that we're making use of in this evaluation. So we've got interviews, we've got surveys, we've got observation, we've got case studies, review of admin data from DfE and other sources, and also we've got some collection of pupil data actually from the schools themselves, but this is only for the first and second years of our delivery. Next slide, please. So this slide just provides a bit more detail on the impact evaluation. So we have got an intervention group, which is the group that's receiving the APST intervention, and this is made up of 3 cohorts of pupils, and their outcomes are being compared to a comparison group. And for the comparison group, for those outcomes that are being measured using admin data, it is all non-participating AP schools, which is around up to 300 AP schools, that is. However, for those outcomes that are being assessed using primary data collection, we've just got a subset of non-participating AP schools, and these schools have been selected because they are in areas for which their serious violence score is close to the cutoff for APST eligibility. On the right hand side, we've got a table, and it kind of neatly shows you all of the outcomes that we're looking at as part of this evaluation. So you can see we've got things such as post-16 participation, reintegration into mainstream, English and math scores for year 11, rate of attendance. You can see that the majority of them are being collected via admin data, so using our school census. So this means that it is as low burden as possible for the schools that are participating. The only outcome that we are using primary data collection to measure is social and emotional wellbeing and conduct and hyperactivity scores for year 7 to 11. The only other thing really to draw your attention to in this table is that you can see that the primary outcome measures have changed slightly from the first and second years of delivery to the third year. So in the first and second years, we've got initial post-16 participation for students in year 11, and we've got reintegration into mainstream education for years 7s to 10. We were never completely comfortable with relying on reintegration as an indication of success for the year 10 pupils, because we know for various reasons that many year 10s don't go on to reintegrate. They actually stay to complete their education within the AP. However, because we were only initially looking at doing 2 years of evaluation, there were limitations on what data would be available and when. We had to kind of resort to this measure, but with extending the programme and also extending the evaluation, we had other options that were within scope. So for the third academic year of delivery, we have got initial post-16 participation for years 10 and 11, and we have limited reintegration to just years 7 to 9. And the next slide, please. And yeah, this is just a final slide to show you when we're expecting to have the findings. So in summer 25, we should have the process, impact and cost evaluation findings for the first and second year of the programme delivery. And in summer 26, we will have the process, impact and cost evaluation findings for the third academic year of delivery. And that's me.
Thank you so much, Pippa and Alice. Has anybody got any questions for either Pippa or Alice at this point? Please put your questions in the chat, or if you're brave enough to put your hand up, that would also be fantastic. Do you want to stop sharing the slides, Pippa, and then we can bring people round? We've got a question from Nadine.
Yeah, hi everyone. Just a query regarding the case study, and I just wondered what the time frame, kind of the intervention span, was for that particular young person.
Thanks, Nadine. I'm afraid I don't know the specific intervention span for that case study, so it's not something I can ask. I mean, there is a range within the APST supports from relatively short-term intervention to intervention over a longer period of time. And I think when we move over to kind of Dirk and Richard's sections, and they talk about their experiences as schools delivering APST, might give you a little bit more of a flavour of what this really looks like for pupils.
Yeah, and just secondly as well, which might tie in, was just kind of the strategies implemented regarding threat to life, and the contextual safeguarding risk, because obviously that's quite a positive case study in relation to the outcomes that have been achieved. However, as a alternative educational provider, it's not often the case that we see such. That can happen, but there's obviously, when there's a threat to life on a young person, and that wider contextual safeguarding concern, because it was briefly touched on, kind of criminal exploitation there with a package. So we're just interested to kind of know a little bit more about that. But hopefully we'll get a bit more insight as we go on.
And I think as well one of the specialist roles within the task forces includes social workers, and there's often that link into the contextual safeguarding through that social worker and through the sort of the multi-agency setup of the task force. So again, I'm sure Dirk and Richard will be able to kind of explain how this kind of works a little bit more in practice, but it's a really important point.
Thanks, Pippa. I'll just pick up the next one, which popped up in the chat before I come to you, Katie, but I can see you're there after this one. A question from Sean Turner. This is a question about referral pathways, and is it a standardised referral system or process across all the pilot sites, or is referral different for different areas?
So it's a really good question. So it's a little bit different in each of the task forces. So there's been a kind of core requirement of what the APST model is, but within that, schools have approached things like referrals and how they triage pupils and how they tier support quite differently. So some may have kind of a more standard referral process, more typical one, and some it's a little bit more flexible and informal. Again, not to sound like a broken record, but I'm sure the flavour of that will come out when Dirk and Richard talk. But what we are aiming to do is share some of this wider learning on what APST looks like within the schools publicly over the coming months. So watch the space.
Thanks, Pippa. Dirk, you've got your hand up. Did you want to come in to respond to that question?
Yes, I was just going to respond to that question. Good afternoon all. I'm Dirk, Pittard, Principal at St Wilfrid's in Doncaster. Very excited when we were asked to be involved in the pilot. So within Doncaster, there's a framework and an inclusion panel that local authority chairs. So there's an inbuilt or an existing mechanism for schools to refer young people to inclusion panel for additional support and intervention. And our Academy St Wilfrid's is part of that framework and part of that intervention. So access to the APST comes as part of that pathway. It's an additionality and has worked really, really successfully. But I appreciate it's different across the different schools within the pilot.
Thank you, Dirk. Bringing in Katie now.
Thank you. So my question is about definitions of AP and how you've done that. So I've noted that you talk about main school registration in state place funded AP, but you also mentioned that you look at a range of AP school types. And then in terms of the evaluation, your comparison group is all non-participating AP schools. So kind of what do you consider is and kind of is an AP? So in Manchester, we have a lot of schools commissioning directly with independent special schools, for example, for alternative provision. Would that fit in your definition of AP? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll kind of start off answering that, and then I think perhaps Alice might be able to answer a little bit on the kind of definition of the comparison group. So by AP, it was state funded AP schools that includes local authority maintained schools, free schools, and academies. So it's and then it was the largest of those within each local authority area that was eligible. I don't know if Alice, you're able to come in on
Yeah,
the...
in terms of the comparison schools, we've got for those outcomes that are being assessed using admin data, it's just all kind of state funded alternative provision schools, and the evaluator will be able to look at things such as like what's the rate of attendance in those schools compared to like the schools where APST has been operating. And then the subset of non-participating schools as well, which we are using as the comparison group for the data that has been collected actually directly from the schools. Those schools are in areas where their serious violence scores were very, very close to the cutoff for APST eligibility, and that means that we can kind of we have a better idea when it comes to comparing like for like. So these schools are very, very similar. So that's just a way we've gone about controlling for that.
Okay, so it's the state funded bit that's interesting to me, because to my mind that means that really what we're looking at is kind of section 19 responsibility, which is pupil referral units, kids who've been excluded from mainstream education. Am I kind of right there? And then I'm happy for us to move on. Obviously, I could talk about this for hours.
I think that's one I'll probably have to take away, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. I'm just going to bring two questions in from the chat before I move back to the audience. So there's a question, I think, for you, Alice, from Ekua Brown. How much are parents, carers and young people involved in the evaluation itself? And then secondly, which could be one for you, Pippa, have there been any challenges from any particular professions in sustaining the support given capacity issues?
So the first question, I was just starting to draft a reply in the chat to that one. Yeah, parents and carers, they are not actually within scope of the evaluation. But in terms of the young people themselves, like they are kind of for the process evaluation side of things, we've had they've participated in some focus groups to kind of provide feedback on like what their experience is of APST actually on the ground. And then when it comes to the impact evaluation, that is all pupil outcomes. So the young people that have received an APST, like I've been to a school that is operating APST, we're looking at their outcomes. How do they do compared to those pupils that haven't attended an APST school?
Can I just add to that, because that was my question. I feel like that kind of answered it superficially in a way, because the people that are actually affected, I know we look at case studies, I know we look at statistical outcomes and things like that, but there's a deeper level to this because they're people and there's layers to it. And I find it quite interesting that parents of that are not involved, because actually they don't live in a silo. We talked about contextual safeguarding, all those kind of things. And usually parents are the people that pick up that something is wrong way before any of this happens. And because there's such a backlog in mainstream schools and there is a difficulty getting kids into alternative provision, I think it makes it difficult, because I think I don't want to be the person that's sort of like isn't positive about it, but what this looks like is yet another system that we're going to put in place. It's going to be funded for a while, it's going to work, and then they will track the funding and we'll go back to the way things were. And what I want to see is actually having parents and the young people be more involved in it to learn from all the previous ones, and then have something in place where even when the funding is reduced, it's able to, because I've been in this for 25 years and I've seen all the things come, and people make decisions, but not directly with the people on the ground. They're the ones living it. So it stands to reason that they would be the more enlighten people as to what should be done. And I find it very interesting that we always have senior people making decisions based on people's lives and they're not included, and then wonder why it doesn't work or it isn't long term. And I'll just leave it there.
Thanks, Echo. I'm going to bring Dirk in because I think Dirk might have a response to this particular question that you've raised, a really good question.
Yeah, I think I would like to respond to that. Although the parental and student voice as a whole may not be within scope of the DfE's evaluation. However, as a school leader, the real strength of multidisciplinary or multi-agency approach is the fact, well, I'm sat next to Lisa here, who's my early help coordinator and a fantastic lead family practitioners are in the home, and their whole evaluation process revolves around the voice of the student and the parent, and that very much comes back into the group. Do you want to say a little bit about that?
Yeah, part of our assessment, the child and the parent's voice, and not just the child that we're dealing with. We deal with the full family approach. So anyone from mum, dad, outside family members that support children that are in the family, we gain their voice. At the end of our work, whether that's been passed on, if it's had to get stepped up to social care, or it's from an early help point of view, it's closed or gone to school, we do a parent evaluation form throughout our local authority anyway, so that gives us the feedback that we need. But parents' voice is paramount from any assessments, from TAF meetings that we hold. That is one thing that we ensure, that both child and parents' voice is accumulated in that.
Yeah, I'm not trying to say that I am a deputy manager, or was, of young people at the edge of care, and also a lead family support worker. So I understand that perfectly. What I'm saying is that actually at the evaluation stage, there should be input there. I think the people on the ground are doing the work brilliantly. I know I've done it for 20 plus years, but I think at the evaluation stage, there should be some input there, because actually what you then implement is then going to be used in the everyday lives of these people. So I don't understand why there isn't that at the evaluation level. Somebody should be sat at the table with that information, with that support, and with input from them, because actually it's directly affecting their lives.
Yeah,
I totally agree.
I'm just going to bring it. So you come back in, Lisa, just briefly, and then I'm going to have to move it on.
Just to add to that, I totally understand where you're coming from. From a local authority point of view, we use Family Stars. So at the beginning of our evaluation, we'd speak to family, get the evaluation there, and then the end of our work. So if that did need feeding through to the DfE, that is something that as St Wilfrid's task force, we already have that collated information. However that gets fed back to you guys is obviously, but that's on hand anyway. We do our data as well through the local authority as well as task force, so we double dated and with parents' voice as well, and to see where we've reached the milestones, what needs to be improved, what we have improved.
And I promise I will touch back on the funding aspect and the sustainability part of it later on as well.
Thank you, and thank you, Ekewa, for that really insightful question. I think it's food for thought, certainly, for the whole programme. I'm going to have to move us on though, because we're slightly over time to where we were planning to be. So I'm going to pass over to Richard from Bradford and his team. So Richard's going to be sharing some slides and then taking us through them.
Hi everyone, Gail, I can only see you. Can you see the slides?
Yes, the slides look perfect. Yeah. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Richard Bottomley, I'm head teacher and the project coordinator at Bradford AP Academy.
And I'm Ella Gregg, speech and language therapist, part of the task force at Bradford AP Academy.
Yeah, so our presentation is about focusing on the role of the coordinator, slightly different to that of the head teacher. So just to give a little bit of background, at BAPA, we provide that statutory 6-day provision for permanently excluded secondary school students in Bradford. Like an awful lot of AP, we meet local need. In Bradford, there's been an unprecedented rise in permanent exclusions of 140% in the last year. that's meant that we've had to adjust massively, and that's the school as well as the task force. So initially we're built for 65 students on our roll. We're currently at approximately 90, and we've had to adjust our practice accordingly, and I'll come to that later on. In terms of the purpose of that task force, obviously the big brief is to reduce violence. We set up our own key performance indicators. Sorry, my slides aren't going on. I'll just come out of this and see if I can change it. There we go. Yeah. So we have 6 outcomes that we work towards, our 6 key performance indicators. I won't read all the bits to you, but essentially they come down to attendance, behaviour, mental health and wellbeing, offending for those who have offended prior to us, reintegration back into mainstream, and those who are NEET. We kind of feel, obviously, if we're getting all those 6 KPIs lined up, violence will itself reduce because the kids are coming to school, they're feeling successful, their mental health needs are being met, and they feel that they've got some hope moving in the right direction. Our task force is made up of a mental health therapist, speech and language therapist, 3 youth workers, a youth justice worker and a post-16 coach. As you'll see from the numbers, the vast majority of our task force are part-time with us. We took an approach to second most of our task force members from their own organisations. So the mental health and speech and language therapists both work for the NHS. We second from there. One of our youth workers works for Children's Services. Our youth justice worker works for Youth Justice. You can see from the pie chart at the bottom where our current funding comes from. So when there was the extension for the task force, we needed to find some match funding. So as you can see from that pie chart, the vast majority of our funding still comes from the DFE. The blue section, which is from our reserves, it's not from our in-year funding, and then Youth Justice Service and Children's Services both contribute funding to the task force. So obviously one of the roles of the coordinator is hoping to try and make sure that we're sustainable. So I do spend a lot of time working with the different organisations, trying to see the benefits of it, and we'll go into those in a moment. Obviously, the biggest area there is that we've got 2 members of our task force from the NHS who at the moment we are still working a lot with to be able to try and get them to be contributing moving forward. And we'll go through kind of what areas of work that encompasses while we're at Bradford Task Force.
So currently as a task force, we have around 122 referrals processed. That's going up each week, and over half of these are actually for more than one member of the task force. At any one time, at least 44 of these referrals are active. Personally, as speech and language therapy, I tend to have 20 to 30 students on my caseload at a time. Every single referral that I've had, which is over 70, has some form of speech, language and communication need. Many of the students who have communication needs also are getting supported by other members of the task force. And we just wanted to have a look at the impact that the task force had last year. So to start with, our attendance rates last year were over 10% higher than the national average of alternative provisions. And our understanding is that these national rates include medical needs, primary and secondary students. Our provision is secondary aged only and predominantly key stage 4. And it's also just worth noting that generally Bradford's attendance rates are at the bottom of the league tables for persistent and severe non-attendance. So you can see why we're really proud of our high attendance figures. 17 students returned to mainstream last year. 88% of these were successful. And previously the most students we'd had returning to mainstream was 13. Also last year, our average pass score went up by 25%. This questionnaire shows the students' attitudes towards self and schools, and it's done at the start and end of their time at Bradford AP Academy. We've got, and last year we had fantastic figures regarding the NEET students, as Richard mentioned, with significantly more post-16 students being in education, employment or training than the national average for alternative provisions. A huge part of our work is now neuro assessment, so assessing for autism and ADHD, particularly myself and the mental health nurse. And this work has evolved over the past 18 months due to the needs of the students at Bradford AP, but also due to the impact that the 3-year waiting list in Bradford for autism and ADHD assessment has. We know our students are some of the most vulnerable and most at risk to violence and criminal activity. So we got myself and the mental health nurse ADOS trains, which means we can do the autism and the ADHD assessment alongside the CAMS team. And this has brought the wait times down to months rather than 3 years, like I say. So to date, 55 students have been referred on that pathway for autism and ADHD assessment. And last year, 16 students did receive a diagnosis. So we think this is really significant in Bradford because there's an absolute massive gap in specialist placements. And as part of the EHCP process, often the educational psychologist will state that a student will benefit from a neurodevelopmental assessment. This would then add a delay to them getting a specialist placement because the specialist or the special school would then say, right, we'll wait for that assessment. So then they'd get stuck with us for up to 3 years, whereas now we can do this in weeks or months, which means if they've got that diagnosis, it opens doors to specialist support, but also specialist educational placements, which is invaluable. Prior to our work, most of our students had never seen speech therapy or never seen CAMS, but now they're actually receiving highly specialist multi-professional assessment in weeks rather than years.
So the work of the coordinator, I mean, essentially, if I can sum it up in one soundbite, it's just having loads of lovely problems to solve, kind of a really refreshing position for AP. We probably one of the best decisions I think we made, because our task force members didn't know each other prior to coming, is that we set up slow. So we booked out a meeting room in a local hotel and spent a couple of days together, sat down, setting out what the vision was. And very much all our task force are kind of lined up the same in that relationships are key. So being able to work at the right pace for the student and bringing those multi-professional skills together. Making sure everyone is on that same page, I think, is really significant. When we did start, there was a fantastic practitioner with us from the Youth Justice Service. But over that initial period, it did just line up that the vision wasn't the same as us. Obviously, when a child is in the youth justice system, there are really clear deadlines and ways of working because of the pressure of having that wide caseload. And those colleagues aren't necessarily experienced in doing prevention work. We wanted to do that. That was our vision. So we swapped that colleague with another of their youth justice workers who bought into the idea of doing that prevention work and not necessarily just sticking to the youth justice kind of path that is kind of for those students who are outside of the task force. And trying to make sure, the coordinator, trying to make sure that everyone comes back to our vision and our way of working all the time, and just using that multi-professional team to get to where you want to be. That nature of the multi-professional team, I think, again, is its biggest strength, but it does just need to keep working on. Obviously, we've mentioned earlier about the nature of the kind of the waiting lists for neuro work as one example in Bradford. And if a student's unable or unwilling to engage in that, quite rightly, when the therapists are working individually, they have to move on to the next case. Obviously, as part of a task force, if a student is struggling to engage, we can change base with a youth worker or another member of staff who's very, very skilled at building relationships with hard to reach families very quickly, and then we can come back and get engagement in place. We've got lots of ways of working to try and increase the probability that students are going to engage in this really significant work. The fact that we've got between 30 and 40 students on average with referrals at any one time, again, is massively the role of the coordinator, and that is really lovely work to be able to do. So we have a Monday morning meeting that we religiously adhere to. We all get together in the same place. As I mentioned before, virtually all our task force is part-time. Monday morning is the one time that we're all together, and we make sure that we have the most efficient use of our resources during that week. So if we want to make sure that, you know, one student doesn't all of a sudden have 5 task force members descending on them at the same time, that we can plan the work that we do to meet the student needs, and the students do come first, but also maximise the efficiency and the resources that we've got available to us. And it's the same across our sites. We don't have lots of meeting rooms. We don't have lots of spare rooms that are just sat waiting for people to go in. So again, in terms of the coordinators' work, we have done work on both our main sites to build extra rooms, to try and create an environment that just allows our multi-professional team to work with as few barriers as possible. But even though we have those rooms, we have to manage them really carefully, and it's been an extra strand of the work that we're doing just to make sure that we can use our sites really proactively and not make them become something that's a problem. And we've had to completely adapt our policy and ways of working constantly. I mentioned earlier about the unprecedented levels of permanent exclusions in Bradford. We have had to set up a remote learning cohort. The task force now has to work with them because they are the most vulnerable. They're waiting for places to become available on site. So they're not getting that quality first teaching on our sites where they've got specialist staff working with them. So the task force is a big strand of that, being able to go out and do assessments and start to make those students feel part of Bradford AP Academy before we can get them in the building. And again, doing that across all our professionals when they've been seconded, and having to make sure that we're not putting them in any compromising or dangerous position will be, again, the work of the coordinator, just to make sure we've got the right people in the right places at the right time in a nice, safe way that helps to meet the needs of all the individuals with us. One of the things probably to highlight as well is when we have seconded our staff, there has been some bits that we've had to do workarounds with. So, for example, as part of our trust, one of the ways that the trust asks us to work is that every member of staff has their own email. We tried to dovetail that with our NHS colleagues in particular, to try and get them working off one, but we couldn't do that. So we've had to put workarounds in place that, again, that just make sure that we're not compromising anybody or putting them in difficult positions. It's also the case with how we record information. Obviously, in education, we generally use CPOMs, but NHS colleagues have got confidentiality built into their work and use System 1. So again, we have to make sure that we're meeting the needs of all our different task force members, and that's been something that's been a bit of an ongoing piece of work for the coordinator throughout. I think probably one of the things that's taken as much time as anything is working towards securing sustainability. So even now, where we feel we're a very established and embedded team working together to meet the needs of the students, I'm fully aware that we've got a really fantastically talented team who are devoted to working to support the young people in their care. By the same token, in March 2025, at the moment, the work isn't ongoing. So making sure that we're doing all that we can to become sustainable and to make sure that we're managing the individuals who are part of that, to make sure that they feel confident moving forward, that the fantastic work that is being done is going to be able to keep going beyond March 2025.
I get all the lovely bits today, so I'm just going to talk about what's really working well for us as a task force. The first thing is the speed. So how quickly as professionals we can get eyes on these vulnerable students. Often they're seen the same week as the week that they're referred if they're a priority, but if not, they're seen at least within that half term. Again, it's been touched on, but the engagement, so being based in the schools and being part of a multi-professional team really increases that engagement, particularly for things like assessments and speech and language therapy. We're able to build really solid relationships with both the students and the staff. Personally, my favourite thing is when another student advocates for the work that I'm doing. So if I go to get a child from class and they might be a bit reluctant, and another student says to them, like, go and do it, she's all right. It just breaks down those barriers that often you face as a professional. We can be really flexible where we see the students, what time of day we see the students, what lesson they can miss for a bit of bribing to increase that engagement. And we can get the results really quickly. So if an assessment or evidence is needed for an EHCP, we can get that really quickly, but equally we can work at the student's own pace. So I know our youth justice worker will sometimes complete his work an hour a day over a couple of weeks to get it all done, or an hour a week over a few months, whatever's best for that student. And finally, just efficiency. So how efficient we are as a task force. As a team, we can work together to get everything needed for the students' needs at any one time. So, for example, to reintegrate them back into mainstream or specialist school, or to successfully deliver a programme that they need. And if I compare this to my other speech and language therapy roles, and think about how many wasted or non-attended appointments there were, you get so much sort of bang for your buck with this model of working.
So the even better ifs, I think, the scale of the working capacity, I've mentioned a couple of times about the unprecedented levels of permanent exclusions in Bradford. We have a task force that's built for 65, currently working with 90 students, 12 of which are on remote learning. We already have an increased referral time just because we've got more students, working with us, and the post-COVID, that level of need has gone up. Ability of our system to respond whenever any new piece of work comes in. So when we decided to set up the remote learning package, we needed to then take that back to the NHS, to the Youth Justice Service, to Children's Services, to make sure that we weren't compromising any of our colleagues, to make sure that they were able to work in a slightly different way because we were having to meet local need. I mentioned earlier those systemic issues that can reduce your likelihood of overall success. It would be even better if we could all be on the same email. We all had similar recording systems. We didn't have to have colleagues carting around 2 or 3 laptops with 2 or 3 different hats on. We put workarounds in place and we can all carry on as normal, but it would be even better if they weren't there. And I think the last point is that uncertainty. No one works well in uncertainty, do they? That this period of evaluation and so on. I don't know anyone in any of the task forces that doesn't think that this is a fantastic way of working, and essentially right for the students who have come into AP. We'd really like that period of uncertainty to be gone so that we can just now start to plan moving forward. And that's us done, Miss.
Thank you ever so much, Richard, and team. That's just really, really interesting. And we've had quite a lot of comments that have come through in the chat that we'll sort of go through. We've partly been, Pippa and Alice and others have partly been answering as we've gone along. We're going to move straight to Dirk now and the team in Doncaster. So if you can hold your questions until after the second presentation from schools, and then we'll have a session of Q&A right at the end. Over to you, Dirk.
Okay, thank you. So I'm just going to talk very, very briefly and then hand you over to Danny Hannam and Lisa Justice, who's on my right-hand side. So I've got my early help coordinator and the youth justice worker with me. I think it's worth saying that one of the real strengths of the pilot was that it was up to the individual schools to decide on the exact makeup of their APST. So, in Doncaster, we identified very early on that we had a real need in extending the school day to work with more young people and families outside, if you like, the school building and the school system. So that was a team that I built up around that area. I think, as Richard said, most AP free schools or schools working with young people identified a real need for speech and language therapy. So that had to be a strength there as well. But very, very much right from the word go, this may have been a DFE funded pilot. However, I think we all could see the strength very, very early on, the undoubtable need that these young people and their families had. And right from the word go, it was about, okay, so we've got this for now, but what's the sustainability? How are we going to keep this going? And for me, there was really only one way, and that was about, we had to look at the impact and we had to show those organisations that seconded, or for want of a better word, loaned us their staff, that this was a more efficient way of working, targeting vulnerable young people and their families, and actually adding a level of support that perhaps didn't currently exist in the way that they currently worked. So like changing minds and showing the impact of what we did. So I'm going to hand over to Danny and then Lisa just to talk about how it's different for them in coming out of the organisations they're in, and then I'm going to pull it back together by just showing you a couple of the areas of impacts that I've seen within the school and the young people. So Dan.
Hi, just want to say the team at Bradford said a lot of amazing things. I was very impressed with their presentation, and so there's going to be a duplication actually because I was nodding along. In terms of youth justice and the kind of work we do at Youth Justice, Richard mentioned there was a rigidity to that, and there's a very formalised and it's a closed system of work. And so for me to come into this, yes, there was a period of adjustment as well. So that's really interesting you mentioned that. It's a different way of working. There's a flexibility with working as part of the task force that in terms of timescales as well, there's not the strictness to adhere to certain timescales. So what we're finding is we can work immediately with children within the same week, as was already mentioned. And also we work out of term time as well. We do so when the schools are closed, there's still contact with the young people throughout the summer period and through Christmas coming up. So there's that flexibility in terms of that. The timescales as well. What's interesting is when a young person does commit an offence and then is expected to attend court and then subsequently be allocated to a youth justice team member, that entire period in one instance took around 6 months. And in that period, I'd done a piece of work with that, well, more than one piece of work with that young person, and actually assisted with the youth justice referral pre and post youth justice intervention, and actually wrote recommendations to court based on my interactions with him, which had been extremely positive. So that directly influenced something in terms of getting a flavour of the young person, their current up-to-date circumstances, what their lived experiences were. And we've just subsequently as well received some really positive feedback a year or a year and a half down the line from mums stating what a vital intervention that was at a really crucial time in that young person's life, where he had committed a violent crime, but is now on a very advanced college course around mechanical engineering. So we were so impressed with that. So that's a good sort of anecdotal idea there for you. We also tie in very closely with the existing school staff, and we do a lot of work as part of a spotlight session around highlighting young people that require immediate help, because we've got such a high turnover of young people accessing the school. We get them. That's one of our key ways of getting referrals. It's basically upon entering the school, they are assessed by PLAs, by senior leadership as well, as to their needs, and then we respond accordingly. One of the big pieces of work that I found most fulfilling is the transition work. So when a young person who most often have some form of attachment need, as a counsellor as well, not in this role but as part of my sort of DNA, I'm aware of how important it is for that young person to feel wanted and not just to be abandoned upon leaving our school provision. So I sort of initiated a lot of transition work, even if we're doing a short piece of work at the school, is to ensure that they're comfortable in their new provision. And I advocate and use that voice to obviously try and make some changes. And we could also refer back into the task force at that point and use some form of dual registering. So it's not goodbye for that young person, which I think is vital in terms of their experience of the school system, the youth justice system and the early health system. I'll pass over to Lisa. If there's anything anybody wants to know about the specific work that I do with young people, I'm more than happy to answer any questions afterwards, but I'll pass over to Lisa, who's the early help coordinator.
Hi everyone, I'm Lisa Justice. I'm early help coordinator for the local authority. So this task force was quite daunting when I first arrived here, because I didn't usually deal with schools as such. But all I can say from a positive, it's just been remarkable at how quick we can get interventions in. And obviously from early help point of view, it's got to be consensual. So in school holidays from September, I started rag rating while all schools are on holiday. I get this in all the time. I'm rag rating the kids to see if there's been any involvement with social care, if there's been any past involvement with early help, paths workers or anything like that. We also we have a zone referral form, so all referrals come through to me. So if there's a member of staff in school that's got any worries about a child and feels like they could do with some parental direction, because we all know that most of the children's problems usually come from start at home. I think the really important thing from our point of view is that is the child's voice. We as a local authority rave on about the child's voice, but we can, with consent, get into the family and work alongside that family, because sometimes it is just support that the family are needing, whether, you know, there's been problems with antisocial behaviour, I can refer him to Dan, whether it's parenting, and we can put a parenting programme together. I have a family practitioner who works with me, but on every referral that we go out to, I go along so that I can speak to the parents and I can identify need, whether it's substance misuse, like say antisocial behaviour. how it's affecting that family, because I think one thing that we see from an early help point of view is the growth. So if we've got a problem with a 15-year-old, there's usually problems going to be arising with the smaller members of the family, because this what they're seeing and what they're hearing and what it's having on the development. So we can identify that to stop that escalating in future. The referrals I can get, identify very quickly, and as a local authority we're open for counsellors. We have really great working relationships with multi-agencies such as CAMS. We use a system in Doncaster called Mosaic, and health, police use this system as well. So if there's been any referrals through from the police, any missing episodes, I log on in the morning, and that information's there for me straight away. So there's always a case recording on there. So as a multi-agency, we all know what's happening around this family and child. Obviously, I have to be very careful what information I can share, but it just stops that delay in intervention straight away. Working with the school is just absolutely phenomenal. To be able to just walk out of our office and speak to one of the teachers and say, how's this child doing, or seeing that child is great. Again, that can take weeks to have, arrange appointments within different schools and from an early help point of view. The other good thing that I always wear 2 badges. So I have my council badge and my Delta badge. If they've had a problem within school, we've taken our hat off and say, we're not to do with school, we are a multi-agency. We hold TAF meetings. I've just been in one before we come here where we've got every agency around the table, and so we can get that quick intervention. The results have been amazing, even from my colleagues that work in early help, and been recognised as a task force. I sit on inclusion, as Dirk briefly spoke about when we started in Doncaster. We have an inclusion panel. I'm one of the board members on there. And when I first started, nobody had heard of task force. Now everybody's trying to refer into task force. Yes. We've created a bit of a monster, I think. But like I say, being able to work with someone like Dan straight away, Dan, could you do this piece of work with this child on anything to do with youth justice? It's just, it's amazing.
So just now trying to pull that together, there are, of course, many different ways that you can measure impact. I'm just going to share 2 slides with you just to sum up an area that I think we're worth. Hopefully you can see these slides. So in an impact area, one of the key points for me was adding extra capacity to the school team. So that multi-agency approach, based on their own school site but operating out of a separate building with a shared car park, that meant that our hours of operation were extended way beyond the school day. I've only just got used to Lisa phoning me up at 8 o'clock on a Friday night, just telling me about an amazing piece of work she's done with the family and the siblings that she's uncovered that need some additional support. And yes, they can get added onto the caseload as well. So interestingly, it feeds into Pippa's explanation of that 3-tiered approach of early intervention, of short-term turnaround and reintegration and longer-term places. This APST team is very much at the heart of that early intervention and leading into, which I'm going to feature in a moment, that reintegration side as well. So the team are just all over it. They're regularly in the building, supporting learners, building those relationships. Lisa and Danny get where water can't. They're often into the family homes, helping with attendance issues, helping turn parental engagement round. Lisa's talked about that. I was not prepared for the summer holiday that I had to come back and see a rag on my table which said, this is 125 young people and their families. I've rag rated them. These are the order of priorities. There were some cases that were open that needed shutting, so I shut them. I've referred and chased some other members of staff, and it was just such a fantastic piece of work. You look at that average time from referral to the work starting is 2 days, if not hours. We were talking within Doncaster about a process which is already very good but can take weeks, but a majority of our interventions, it just happened almost instantly. Youth justice work seen similar intervention, great effect. Danny's caseload has doubled, which he regularly thanks me for. However, most of that's pre-court rather than post-court work, and surely that is better for the young people, and it's better for the system, and it's having more impact. We do a lot, as Danny said as well, trauma-informed interventions, counsellor, mental health worker that's not sat here with me because she's busy with young people at the moment, and that's interwoven through the school, meaning more time we're getting to know those negative behaviours, challenge and put interventions in place to deal with them. So that the first bit was adding extra capacity to my team, and that conversation with the staff was, I am not going to take workload off you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you additional capacity, more tools to help these young people be more successful and ultimately get to those positive destinations. I hope you can see this slide. I'm just going to talk just a little bit about it. It's just I'd like to finish just with a little bit of data. So this is specifically into that middle tier, that tier 2 that Pippa talked about reintegrating young people back into education or positive destinations. So between November 21 and 22, so the first year of Taskforce operating, and it's deliberately a data that's a year old. And I just explained that in that time, 93 students transitioned through 32 assessment places within St Wilfrid's in Key Stage 3. And out of that 92 students, they can be referred through a number of different pathways. Either they were day 6 following a permanent exclusion with the aim of being assessed and then reintegrated through an IFAP process, in year fair access protocol, back into a mainstream school, an inclusion panel referral where mainstream schools take young people they are looking for some additional support with, and that's the panel that Lisa sits on. Or then we take direct commissions from any school in the city of Doncaster. Currently, out of 125 students, we're working with 23 different schools. So last year, out of those 30 day 6 students, 29 started successfully at a mainstream school, and a year later are still there. 1 year 9 student did end up transitioning and starting at Key Stage 4 PRU, and I think that's really important to again reiterate that we're part of a continuum of support within Doncaster where we have mainstream, special, alternative provision set up really successfully, and to a local authority Key Stage 3 and 4 pupil referral units. Through inclusion panel, more places, 15 transitioned back to mainstream and stayed. 1 moved into a Key Stage 4 long-term place. That's the Tier 3 intervention that was talked about in the AP and SEND improvement plan. And a small number into the Key Stage 3 and 4 PRU, and 1 needed specialist other AP support within the medical framework. And then out of the 35 direct commissions we had, 32 transitioned back into mainstream with support, with an assessment overview when looking at what the barriers to learning with and strategies to help them reintegrate and be successful. So as a whole, out of those 93 students, 82% transitioned back to mainstream and a year later have stayed there, which I think is important. But even more importantly was that 100% of students found a setting that was appropriate to meet their needs. And I can't stress just how important that is. And again, I back up what Richard said. Good quality, high quality AP that's set up and geared up right finds those positive destinations. And like Bradford AP, you know, if I were to share with you that last summer, on average, out of the 125 students, approximately 45 to 50 leave us in year 11. We're now in our 5th year of having NEETs of 4% or less, because it's about finding those positive destinations, which actually, you know, mainstream schooling would struggle to meet those sort of numbers. And the team that I've got around me are such a key part of that additional support, filling that gap that we had. And again, it's about showing the impact and the impact to their parent organisations and saying, look, this way of working, 1, really works, 2, it's more effective than the way that they're currently set up. Even more so, so we now got the lead educational psychologist who's not part of APSTs, but chooses to work 1 day in St Wilfrid's a fortnight because she knows the 6 referrals that she's going to get during the day that she works here, those appointments are all going to be made. She's not going to have caseload of her time that's wasted, that valuable time that she's got. Whereas perhaps in her clinical phase, where a parent or carer would bring a young person into the clinic, 50 to 60% of those appointments would be made and the rest would be missed. And that's just such important time that she can't afford. And that's a way of us showing, look, this really works. We need to sustain it. And it's about encouraging and the parent organisation saying, yeah, I tell you what, it's worth us leaving our staff there because of the impact that you're having. So that's us, that's the team. And if I can figure the button to stop sharing, I should reappear on your screens. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Doncaster team. That was fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing your presentation. And while you've been speaking and while Richard was speaking, there's been some really positive comments in the chat. Thank you to all the speakers for answering questions as we've gone along in the chat. I think the only one, I've just had a quick look, that's still outstanding is, I think Joanne Bliss has asked about a trauma-informed approach and whether that underpins the approach that you're both taking in your schools. I don't know who wants to pick that one up.
I mean, we have done trauma-informed training. I'd like to think it's kind of woven into everything and every bit of what we do. So yeah, yes, from a Bradford point of view.
Yeah,
thanks, Richard.
Yeah, we can concur with that as well. It's part of a youth justice statutory offer now as well. In terms of when we're assessing young people, we look at we have to use all the available resources to research what has occurred in their lives, their lived experiences, and work alongside that. So yeah.
Yeah, we use the trauma informed through the local authority. We've also got additional as an early help coordinator. In schools, not just in St Wilfrid's, but we go out and we do the GCP2 training, so mosaic training, so for staff, so everybody, we do parental conflict with separated parents. So there's a lot of work there that we do outside of what the normal trauma-informed working would be as well.
Thank you, that's great. Another question's just come into the chat, and if anyone's got any questions now, we do have time if you'd like to put your hand up or do keep feeding them into the chat. So this is specifically to hear from Jenny Walton, to hear from seconded team members, whether there are any challenges about still feeling connected to your home services. I don't know if you can say that with your head teacher sat next to you, but you might want to go.
No, I'm happy for them to say absolutely what they do.
Well, in terms of the service that we've come from, in terms of maintaining, good question actually. It's different because I'm working in a way that is not familiar to my previous team. So it has been sort of agreed that we sort of create this in our own way, in our own model. And so my job is very much a hybrid of my previous role, and again, more of a youth work kind of perspective for the engagement side, which from more of a youth justice role now is very heavily based on the administrative side of things. So yeah, it's been challenging, but I've had no issues. That's probably the best way of putting it. I've had no issues in terms of the joined up working, because again, I've been doing referrals with my previous team pre and post. So I have had those connections with young people that are familiar to me, and I've helped inform, hopefully, helped inform their assessments as well.
I think from my point of view, the great thing is that I only get involved with the children and families that I'm involved with. School don't pull me into anything that's nothing to do with early help, because I know that would be a worry. It was a worry of mine that when I came that I was going to be brought in and stood on a corridor directing children. That doesn't happen at all in my own office. The other thing that I do is I supervise my family practitioner's cases. So I know every child that she's dealing with monthly, that she has supervision with myself. I actually have supervision with my pathway lead on the cases that I hold. So my role is slightly different to a coordinator within the local authority. For one, they don't hold cases. I still like to keep my hand in holding cases, just because of it being a pilot. And two, I still do some work with the local authority, like delivering training, but that's great because I can deliver it through back to school as well. So
yeah, it was one of the things that I insisted on from the team, that if you like, the clinical supervision continued, so they didn't lose touch with their parent organisation, so that kept going. So they kept the training, they kept the contacts, and all of that work continued. So they very much are still part of the services that they were in. They're just working in a slightly different way. I think, just to turn the question on the head, one of the hardest things was actually, as a head teacher, I'm very used to running a school, and I'm very used to my staff working between 7 and 4:30, 5 o'clock, but then turn that on its head, and to have staff that you're responsible for that perhaps work 12 until 7 in the evening.
12? What was that one then?
is a different challenge all on its own. And so I'm going, well, where is this person? And you have to relax and just that different way of working. So I think out of all of them, it's perhaps been myself that's been a little bit more stressed about learning about how it all coordinates and pulls together.
We still have to go through the same framework with the local authority. So any child that comes and gets open to early help, we have a time frame of 2 weeks to get out to see that family, to write a full assessment and hold a TAF meeting. So we still have to go by those guidelines. We're still audited on all our cases by the local authority and Ofsted. So I'm not just Ofsted in school, we've got Ofsted that comes into the local authority as well. That is, we still work to those time frames.
What's coming, Richard?
I was just going to add, really similar to those guys, but just something that I've done recently to stay connected to the team. We have, as speech and language therapists, we have students. So I had a student on a block with me before the summer holiday, and for speech and language therapy, this is a very niche environment to work in. It's a very niche age group. It's not the most preferred. So a big part of my role has sort of been raving about it, encouraging other speech and language therapists. And I had a really good student. So I put a lot of work in to selling to her how fantastic it is, what a difference we can make. And she just at the start of this school term has started same amount of days as me, so 3 days a week, but in our primary PRU in Bradford. So like replicating this model slightly of what we're doing, not within the task force, but the sort of speech and language interventions. So things like students, but then also similar to what's been said, supervision, line management, team meetings keeps you involved in that team, but it is a very different way of working as well.
Thank you. We've got Pippa's been answering some of the questions that are specifically relevant to DfE. We've got a couple of questions for the schools. We've got a question from Andy who's asking, have you had any recruitment issues? Recruiting educational psychologists in particular, Andy says, is very difficult in his area.
Yeah, it's the same in Bradford.
From Winston, sorry?
Sorry, because it's the same in Bradford. We don't have an educational psychologist in our team, though, but that situation I know because we do use them. Yeah, there's a massive shortage up here as well, but it hasn't impacted on the task force.
And as I said, we're very lucky with the educational psychologist. It's been speech and language support. Ironically, despite there being a pot of money, they're like gold dust. So if there are any speech and language qualified support out there that wants to come and work for me, that's absolutely fantastic. That's an advert for you. But that has been an area that we struggle to recruit. And also, as the reputation of the work that the task force do gets out there, then there are other organisations that are looking for some very good members of staff that want some of the specialists that we've got. So that recruitment is less of an issue. Keeping those really good members of staff is harder.
Thank you for that. And then we've had a question from Winston about, do you utilise the ELSA model? I'm not familiar with the ELSA, so I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly. In your schools, how are EPs, educational psychologists, used to strengthen the pilots? So does that, do you does Elsa mean something to you? I've not heard of that before.
Yeah, so emotional literacy assessments and support. We have a number of staff trained to deliver that as an intervention within the academy, absolutely. But you know, we have a whole raft of interventions to work with young people, from assessments to phonics support for emotional literacy. As Lisa said, she's trained in a variety of different areas to deliver training within the academy. So it's really about assessing the needs of the young people and then putting an individual package in to support them. So absolutely, it's not a one size fits all. And again, coming back to that is the strength of this APST, that you are adding capacity, you are adding more support, and if you bring more of that in, well, it's not rocket science. You know, the impact actually doesn't surprise me in any way, shape or form. What surprises me, though, are just how many young people and families it's been able to support. That has been overwhelming.
Really interesting, thank you. And then we've had a question from Echoa about how much schools do you involve the community in the programme? So I'm just finding the question. So yes, do you go out into the community? Is that part of the model, or less so?
We do work in the community, not necessarily any more or less because of the task force involvement, I wouldn't say. Again, the nature of Bradford is we work with permanently excluded young people, so they come all the way across Bradford. So we're kind of involved in all the bits of the community and all the different areas, but it's not sort of directly linked to the task force work. Essentially, if there's projects that we can get involved in that we feel we can make a positive contribution to, we do. And I think the task force helps to make that decision more easy because the kids are probably in a better place, they can get support quicker and so on. Yeah, but it's not been a kind of an explicit addition to our work.
Sorry, Richard, I just wanted to ask, just so that if like you're doing this, it can oftentimes create a dependency as well. So when they actually leave this or leave school, is there somewhere else they go? Is there a transition? Is there support within the community if they choose not to, you know, proceed with education and things like that? Is there a sort of transition? Because education just doesn't stop with school. There's stuff beyond that, emotionally and everything else.
Yeah, so we have, it's a great question. Yeah, if I do the education bit, we do have a team of people, we call them inclusion leaders, who support transition throughout any transition our students make. So when they first come into us, then if they move our sites or if they go to another school or go into college, the support with all those bits with education, it mainly focuses on education. We do have a gentleman who doesn't sit in the task force, but who works for a local charity who we second 2 days a week. His role is from a charity called Action for Sport, but he does everything really, the kind of extracurricular stuff. So he will try and tap into kind of passions that kids have, and then he has a fund from us that he can use to try and get kids to engage. So if they've got an interest in football, he will try and couple them up with a local football team. And if they've got issues with subs, we can support that. We can give them kit. We can go and support them in those initial meetings. They can share kind of our risk assessments, our ways of supporting those students to be given that right environment. And it's not just sport. If a child loves, playing the violin or singing, or, we try and sort of funnel those into those different areas. I think it's one of those brilliant things, if we had an infinite resource, you'd be ploughing so much into that, because you're exactly right. We kind of find that our kids are fantastic when they win us, and, they feel safe and feel well and want to succeed. It's the outside bit that generally brings the problems, and the more we can get positive stuff going on for them in that outside bit, the higher your chances are, aren't they?
Thanks, Richard. Do you want to come in, Dirk?
Yeah, I was going to actually mention some of the work I've done with young people is introducing them to their next educational provision, some of the post-16 ones as well, when we've used careers advisors within school. We've also used careers advisors as part of the interventions team at Youth Justice as well. There's a large careers advisory service there, which is actually accessible for, not a lot of people know, it's accessible throughout Doncaster, regardless if you've been part of the youth justice system. So what I've actually personally attended some of these appointments with young people beyond the St Wilf sort of time frame, let's call it, of leaving in year 11. So I've kind of gone beyond that for a certain amount of time to make sure that they're settled.
Yeah, I mean, one of the strengths is that Danny and Lisa both, and the same goes for our mental health therapist, our lead family practitioner, even when we perhaps the educational pathway closes and they transition to a new destination, that doesn't automatically stop the APST support. And that, again, is a real strength. These critical members of our staffing team, they follow that young person and ensure the next step happens, if you like, seamlessly, but with a trusted contact and a trusted relationship. And, especially in Danny's case, many times a family or young person has come back for some additional support, touching base, and we've got so many case studies and letters of thanks and referral, if you like, back to say, can you give us a little bit more?
Yeah, I think anecdotally, I feel like one of the consistent themes we keep hearing is this idea of getting the timing right. We seem to be there at the right time, which I often didn't hear actually in my previous role, where we were coming into very complex situations where there'd been a heavy pattern of offending behaviour and no interventions put in place of any meaning, which then you were starting from quite a difficult point in that young person's life.
I think one case that sticks with me that we're still working with, to be honest, is one that got sent through for a child that was attending St Wilfrid's. His elder brother had been involved in county lines and been really heavily involved in gangs, to where there was the family was going to have to be moved to a safe house, etc. That all died down, but there was worry around the child that was coming to St Wilfrid's because he wasn't being seen, and the people that he was being seen with were still part of the gang. However, after going into the family home, that one child didn't seem to be the problem. But what we did find is that there was a sister that was a year older that was out of education, that had been sexually assaulted, and the perpetrator was still out, been on crime watch, etc. And this had not even been identified. So we've got a girl here that looked very painfully thin. She's now been diagnosed as anorexic because of all the trauma that had gone on from around her brother, been in gangs. And the one that was referred into us, what was picked up by St Wilfrid's actually, because of the involvement with brother, was actually the least piece of work. However, after being involved with them for a good 12 months now, because mum won't let us close, because every time we go to close, she has a bit of a panic. We've now, brother's, what was in the gang, has now got a job. He has moved out of area, but he has got a job and he's got his own family. The sister's getting work from CAMS. Other multi-agencies are involved with her for her eating disorders, etc. And the young lad that was initially the one that was brought to our attention is attending here and his provision and is more settled now. And his mum, one of the things that his mum said to my family practitioner last week was that she's got his son back. He wouldn't go in education at all, but he sees St Wilfrid's as a safe place. No gang involvement. And like I said, those two other factors wouldn't have been identified if we hadn't been able to open to early help and has been able to identify that there was gang involvement, because school wasn't aware of any of that because they wouldn't have that sort of information. But the sister is now going into college as well. So we've got success story for 3 children when there was only one that was brought to our attention.
So that is a critical example where, had that young person been in a school without the support of the task force, whatever interventions were put in place within the school and the school environment would never have got to the bottom of the real issue behind that family. But Lisa, in her role and seconded through the task force, has been able to unpick that and do something differently to support that young person, their siblings and the family. And again, we're looking for parent and student voice, and that's it. That's what it does in a nutshell. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to bring things to a close now, as we have just literally reached time. I think we could probably do another couple of hours there discussing some of this. A real interest in the model. There's lots and lots of positive comments in the chat. Lots of questions. So I'm sure the speakers will sort of pick those up later. We haven't got time for any more right now. But thank you for all your interest. As I said at the beginning, we will be sending you the link to the presentation presentations and the slides, and do keep in touch with us at YF. Join up with our newsletter, and then you'll be hearing how this project progresses, and also have opportunity to join other virtual learning cafes that may be of interest to you in the future. Thank you all for your time, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of afternoon.